This is the exciting part of the class. This is the part of the class we've been building towards all semester long. It's going to give us the opportunity to take all those building blocks and put them together, going from this one on through our relationships, family, and workplace. It's really going to lead us into where we want to go and what we really intended to get out of this class. Today we want to talk about managing power, the psychology of conflict, discrimination, conflict in relationships, power and conflict, conflict endings, and what happens with unresolved conflict. Now, managing conflict and power. Conflict in interpersonal relationships will always happen. It's one of those things to be expected. It might be a large blow up, it might be a little one, but it is going to go on. So we need to understand what exactly conflict is. And it occurs when we're perceiving the other person is not working towards the same goals as we are, or that they are in some way hindering us from reaching our goals. And of course, this can break down relationships quite rapidly. I know each of us have been in some type of relationship, whether that be a friend in kindergarten, all the way to our love interest and our sweetheart in high school, where there's been some type of conflict that has broken down. The conflict theory says this happens because we're in competition. If we go back to that invitational rhetoric we talked about a long time ago, remember that we oftentimes engage in multiple types of interaction, and the first two types that we mostly engage in here in the United States is conquest, where we're going to conquer, dun, 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 or we'll let you come over and join our side, so we're going to convert you. And those two are often the ones we engage in. What we need to head towards is more of an invitational where we're interacting with. But we'll find that we have conflicts over things like money, property, commodities, which we'll get into in a little bit, because commodities isn't just something on the stock exchange. Instead, it's something in our relationships that can be even our friends. Now, because we're in conflict with another individual, we get into where we're fighting for intangible things: leisure time, dominance, social status, sexual partners, many things. This is oftentimes when you're talking about what the Joneses have down the street. You know, what does Bob own? Did they just buy a new car? Well, we got to get a car, so we're in competition. And this is very dangerous when we're in a relationship, because it can destroy friendships. Bob's your friend, he got a new car, now you have to get a new car, which means you have to work more hours, and it makes you unhappy, and you blame Bob because, hey, he got that new car. Now there's some correlation that goes on, and sometimes we're correlating what we're perceiving as a conflict or a cause of conflict when it's not really the cause. So this can be a case of where events or people or behaviors, you're relating them, they're trying to stop me, they're trying to keep me from achieving my goals when they're not actually doing it. Perhaps it's at your job where you're both going for the promotion. Well, the other person is trying to stop you from getting it. When in all honesty, they're just worried about getting it for themselves, and they're not really in conflict with you. And then the promotion comes down, you're mad at them because they got that promotion that you wanted, and you got left out, and they don't understand. They're like, I wasn't competing with you, I was just trying to do something good for myself and my family. There's also this zero-sum fallacy that we have. This we often find when we go back to our gender studies, and we talk about cultural aspects of it. We'll say, well, if these two individuals get married, then marriage is worth less because there's only so much love to go around. When in all honesty, there can be love going around everywhere. So we think we have to give up something for someone to get something, and that's not necessarily true. If you give someone equal rights, that doesn't make you have lesser rights. No, you both still have the same amount of rights. It's just a case of perhaps they're being treated like they should have been treated to begin with. This oftentimes these correlations and these falsehoods that we get into in this power structure that we're in leads to discrimination. And oftentimes, our most common one that we find is individual discrimination. And this is often hidden and unintended. It may be a case of where a man feels like he needs to earn more money than the woman because he has to take care of the family. Well, that's not true in our society. In our society, if both people are earning the same amount, it works out great. I mean, I would love for my wife to make the same amount as I do, or me to make the same amount as she does, because that really benefits us both. Organizational or institutional, these are discriminations, the good old boys club, where we've always hired the guys that come from Savannah, or we always hire, and you get into a case of where you're discriminating and it's organized. And this can also lead to troubles. And then there's structural. Now, we didn't get the opportunity to go out and play the game where we're really looking at, we don't all start at this equal point. And because of that, when we think, oh, well, they started at the same place as me, well, maybe they didn't have the opportunity for an education where they were. Maybe they had to start work when they were 13. Maybe there was no books in the house, so they didn't get a chance to read. Maybe they had to live in a poor area of the neighborhood. There are multiple things that this can lead to. I'll post a video showing this, and you can see what you think about it and give me some feedback on it. And oftentimes, it's unintended that this can actually be caused by government regulations. When they decide to build the highway, they don't build it through the rich neighborhood, they build it through the poor neighborhood, which further drags down the cost or further drags down the value of their homes. With it. It didn't work, that's okay. So we'll go on. When the textbook talks about conflict, I'm going to go away from it, as I tend to do. It begins with perception. I don't necessarily think this is true, because discrimination doesn't just begin when you perceive the other person. Ernest Tolman, a psychologist who looked at behavioralism, determined that oftentimes our discrimination is rooted further back than that, where because we pick up some of the discrimination behaviors from our parents and from our culture, that we expect it to be rewarded. So even though we don't display it initially, because we don't encounter the person to be discriminated towards, we actually expect it to be rewarded because that was a social norm. So it can actually begin before you perceive the other person. You develop your schemas, your heuristics beforehand, where you're coming up with a mental picture of what the person is, even before you see them. And then when you see them, you're trying to do that fill in the blank so that way you can justify your discrimination. I do agree with conflict involves clashes in goals and behaviors. It is a process. I mean, we don't just start out in conflict with everyone. We can actually be friends with a person. And then, like we said, oh, they got that promotion that you didn't get, and suddenly there's a clash of goals. And so no longer are you friends, you're now frenemies. And from enemies, you go to enemies. So you can see it kind of can evolve and it can become a process. If you can identify early in the process that this is going on, and you can step back and go, whoa, that's not who I want to be, or this relationship is worth saving, you'll have an opportunity. It's dynamic. Humans are dynamic. We're not a stagnant thing. We change, we learn. Every moment we become a different person. And because of that, conflict can be very dynamic as well. Have you ever had a person that's just not a morning person, and you meet them in the morning? Boy, you really liked them in the afternoon, but in the morning, you didn't want to be around them. Conflict in relationships. You really need to look at if the conflict that you're having is actually a symptom. And by symptom, what I mean is you might be upset at your spouse or your significant other. And instead of saying, I'm mad at you, you're saying, you always leave the toothpaste lid cap off the toothpaste. It gets all over, then I have to clean, and I'm mad. Is that a symptom or a cause? A symptom is something that is displayed, but has an underlying cause. So your cause might actually be they're not paying enough attention to you. And so the way you resolve that is you get into conflict. When you're in conflict, you have attention going on, you're sharing, but not in a positive way. So when you go to irritating partner behaviors, that so oftentimes is one of the symptoms we'll see. Disagreements regarding relationship rules. Now, there are relationship rules that we have based off of our culture, based off of our family models, and based off of our experiences. And we need to communicate these, because if we don't communicate them, it will cause conflict. I mean, your spouse may not know that your boyfriend in the 3rd grade kissed someone out on the playground, and ever since then, you don't like your spouse or significant other being near a person of the opposite sex or being near someone they might be attracted to. So you have to make that clear to them. Personality clashes. These are the ones that pop up when you first move in together. You've been dating for 2 years, you've gotten along, and then suddenly you're in the same space all the time. And then you start finding out, that's when you start seeing all the symptoms click off and realize those symptoms are being caused because you have a conflict of personalities. Maybe you're a very clean person and they have a tendency to just leave their pants and shirt on the floor in piles. It's hard to say until you get there. Power is always present. So as we move into talking about power, in relationships, there's always power. There's the symmetrical power relationships with balanced power. Now, we like to think this is what everyone strives for. I know in my relationship with my wife, we tried for that. We actually shoot for that. We want, I don't just do the lawn work and she do the dishes. No, I do the dishes and we work together and we try to keep it balanced because we're both giving to something we want to build. That's something we are comfortable with. Now, there's a complementary relationship. And these complementary relationships, we like to think, that is not something I really want, but it works for some people. I have a friend who likes to come home and be the house maintainer and keep things going at the household. And that's what they're contributing to the relationship. And they like for their spouse to go out and work. Well, it works for them. It's not a balanced power that we're always saying, well, he didn't vacuum the floor, so apparently he doesn't care. No, it's something where they've worked it out and it works for them. There's a didactic power theory, which was proposed by Rollins and Barr in '76 and later revised by Dunbar. It emphasizes that the relationships perceived power of partners in a relationship. In other words, we have to perceive what our power is and what their power is. And so we have to create our own didactic theory or look at the power structure to determine if it's working for us. Symmetrical working for us, complementary working for us. It's kind of something we have to decide in the relationship. From social psychological perspective, power is generally defined as a capacity to produce intended effects. So if we want to feel loved, we want to feel cared for, we need a partner that's important to, that they want to express and show love and caring. In some relationships, that's not what we want. We want independence. We want our free time. We need our space. That's okay. Now, you run into conflict when one wants one and one wants the other. So you have to learn from each other. And then we will try to influence our partner through power to do what we expect of them. Well, you didn't get me those flowers, so, I'm not going to talk to you for a day. That's a power struggle right there. So what they're trying to say is, okay, let me give you, you didn't give me, so I'm going to take away from you. And so that, of course, that relationship power leads into conflict. Now, of course, it can be used with or without ethics. In ethics, you're expressing and you're saying, what you did hurt me, and thus I want to express it, I want to say it, and so I really don't want to go out to dinner with you tonight because you've hurt me. Or if you're not using ethically, you end up with a case of the silent treatment without explanation, and really you're trying to hurt the other person, you're trying to damage them because you feel like they've damaged you. This is another important concept, is power is granted. Believe it or not, if someone has power over you, you've given it to them in some form or another at some point in the relationship. Now, once after you give power, it's difficult to get it back. And because it's difficult to get it back, you have to really kind of be a little slow on how you give power. If you give them power over all your finances and then suddenly you're broke, well, it could be because you granted them the power to do that. So watch, power is always granted in relationships. And the power within the relationship influences the conflict. If someone has all the power, guess who's winning the arguments? That's right, the person with all the power. On the other hand, if you have equal power, you actually run into a little bit less conflict because no one really can engage in a I will dominate, I will conquer type of approach. Power currencies. This goes back to what we were talking about a little bit ago. Power currencies. This is what gives you power in relationships. There's the resource currency. How many people have heard of someone staying in a marriage because he owns the house, or he's got the car? These are resources for the person. Expertise. I actually saw this a lot when I was working with widowers or widows earlier in my life, where one person would actually pass away before the other one, and the other one didn't know how to pick up what the other person did. I had widowers that did not know how to cook because they never cooked for 50 years. Their spouse took care of it. But expertise can come into play with other things as well, where, well, he knows how to fix the car, or she knows how to fix the car. And so that expertise, well, if you get out of the relationship, you lose that. That's a currency. It's like money. Social network currency. Your friends. Well, gee, if I leave, then I'll never get to talk to my friends again because they'll all side with her or him. And so you want to maintain those other bonds. This can also come into play with family, well, God, my father-in-law really is a great guy, but if I get divorced, I'll never see my father-in-law again. So you do that. Personal currency. This could get into almost the family dynamics where the kids, or even the dog, things of that variety. And you hear people saying relationships because of personal currency. Intimacy currency is a case of where if, hey, you don't do what I say, I'm not going to hug you, I'm not going to hold you, I'm not going to kiss you, I'm not going to be around you, I'm going to withhold intimacy. And that is a currency that people play. Now, realize one person doesn't necessarily have all this currency. And each currency can have a different value in a relationship. Resource currency can oftentimes be what holds a bad marriage together. He's got this great job, he has the benefits, or, she has this incredible job that gives us the opportunity to fly places, and you're not really worried about the social currency, but the resource currency is the big thing. Or maybe you have this great group of friends, you introduced them to your spouse, and now that it's going bad, you're afraid of losing them. And so currency can have different values in different relationships. It can even be with one person with their spouse versus one person versus their friend. their friend, they might have a different currency value there and different currency value within their relationship with the spouse. How we handle conflict. Well, correct? We always do it perfectly, never a problem. Sadly, not true. It all comes down to our personality. Some people like to avoid. Whatever I can do, I avoid it. Well, problem is, you're kind of giving your power away in those situations. As a person knows, oh, we're entering an argument, I know how to win this, I will start drawing that currency out, and the person, they won't fight me, they'll just avoid it, and I win. So avoidance can be very difficult as well. Accommodation. Accommodation, if it's one person accommodating the other, it's not a good thing. Once again, that's a case of, oh, well, I have this relationship currency, and I'll tell you what, why don't I just keep giving it to you? I'll keep giving more power to you instead of resolving the issue. And then that way the symptoms go away, but the cause of the conflict doesn't. Competition. Now this can be bad. We see this oftentimes more in our friendships, I think, than we do in our romantic relationships, but it can be in romantic as well, where, oh, well, gee, they just got a promotion, I gotta get a promotion. They just got a car, I get a car. So you're in this huge competition, and you're always looking for the winner and the loser. Now, sometimes you can go into avoidance, and it leads into reactivity, where you just wait for something to happen, and then you react. Rather than trying to put out the fire before it happens or stopping the fire from starting in the first place, you wait till the house is ablaze, and then you rush in. Meanwhile, if you had just unplugged the curling iron, well, sorry. Hair references I never can really work very well. Anyway, if you had unplugged the curling iron, in the first place, the house wouldn't have burnt down. So you wouldn't have had to rush in. And this is a case of where, when we go back to those symptoms we were talking about, you're going back, you're always trying to fix those symptoms. So when you're fixing those symptoms, you're never getting to the cause. And so that cause keeps happening. You think you have it all handled, but you don't. The best one is collaboration. Collaboration is where you work together so that the currencies are more equal, and so that you are working as a group or as a team, and your goals are harmonious and they're going towards the same direction. In this way, you can both achieve what you want, and you don't feel bad. And sometimes that's that compromise right in the middle there. The compromise is, I win sometimes, you win, I lose some, you lose some. So you realize it's not always, that goes back into the competition if you're both trying to, compete. You have personality types. Now you need to understand that personality types is definitely going to impact how you get along in a relationship. If you're a very dominant person and you're attracted towards a very dominant person, you're gonna run into conflict. Meanwhile, maybe if you're a dominant person, you run into more of a steady person, you can kind of work things out there. So conscientious people, they tend to empower everyone in their relationships. So you want to be careful with that. But you want to try to go towards the middle of the chart. But the problem is, it's hard to be there. Now, once again, everything is on a scale. You're not always dominant. As a parent, you're a lot more dominant than maybe you are as a spouse. Why? Because social expectations are, you're going to take care of your children, and to do so, they need to behave and avoid running into the street, things of that type. So look at these, figure out which one you feel you're more of. Realize you can have a little bit of everything in there. You can be enthusiastic but conscientious. You can be steady. This isn't a you're only in one spot thing. No, you're kind of in a degree. Short-term conflict. Now let's look about conflict endings. We're going to have conflicts. They're going to resolve one way or another sooner or later. If you're going to resolve them sooner, you're going to find out your life is a bit happier, a little bit easier. On the other hand, if conflicts drag on and drag on, then you're going to run into troubles as you go down the road. So short-term conflict resolutions, separation. This doesn't mean divorce. No, separation. What it means is, tell you what, I'm mad, you're mad. Why don't we both take 10 minutes, half hour? I'm going to go for a jog, you go for a swim. Do something that will get us out of our mad situation and let us relax. That can be a good separation. On the other hand, I'm storming out and going to the bar may not be what you consider a good form of separation. Matter of fact, it'd probably be negative. Domination, this is the yelling match where you start out little and then higher and then higher and then higher and then higher and then higher, and before you know it, everyone's yelling in the room because you're both trying to dominate. That cannot usually lead to any type of good resolution. Compromise. Compromise is good. And maybe you have some separation and you come back and you can compromise. If you kind of set that situation up, it's good. If you were looking for the win-win solution, the integrated solution, that's where, okay, tell you what, you don't know where we want to go for dinner. I really want to go to the restaurant that you don't like. However, there's this pizza place next door. We both like pizza. I'm not getting everything I want. You're not getting everything you want, but we're both getting pizza. In a world where we all get pizza, we're happy. And structural improvements where, okay, you're upset because I'm taking this time to go out and hang with my friends on a Sunday. Well, and you don't like that. Tell you what, can I have a Sunday afternoon? We're going back into that win-win situation. We're changing our structure, our schedule, to make it work. But in the end with conflict, we have really two choices. Continue the relationship or end the relationship. Now, I had someone that was going through a divorce once tell me that they knew it was time to end the relationship when it hurt more to be with the person than it to be without the person. Now, they had to decide that on their own, but I think that sounded pretty reasonable. When it's more stressful, more painful to be in it than away from it, then maybe that is the time to end a relationship. On the other hand, if being away from the person, this can even go back almost to that currency situation, you stay in it because of that. Maybe it's because it does keep that friends, because it does, and maybe because you are starting to see some compromise. So you can value it for yourself and judge it for yourself. Challenges to handling conflict. All right, here's the challenges. Before we get to decide if we're ending it or if we're continuing in that relationship, we have self-enhancing thoughts. We always believe we're right. We never want to be wrong. I don't like being wrong. I am more often than I'd like to admit, but we have to look at that and understand, oh, I'm always going to look at it from the better part for me than from them. So what you want to do is try to step away from those self-enhancing thoughts and give a critical eye, give a critical view, and see how things are working. Destructive messages. Yeah, this is the one where you're just kind of always chirping away at the person, you know? Of course you didn't get that promotion because you're an idiot. That's destructive. That's not going to help your relationship. That's going to destroy it. Serial arguments, that's our nice little chart over there. You run into people that have these. They'll be in this mad explosion. They'll just be angry at each other. Then they get back together and the world is great. Everything's perfect. It's so wonderful. They go through a honeymoon. And then suddenly something happens. Oh, wait, we were having this great time. And then you took us to the Italian restaurant. You know I hate Italian food. That creates tension. From tension, you go back to that explosion. This is a bad circle to be in. If you find yourself in this circle, look at it objectively and say, how do I step away from this? Where can I go? And how can I get there? Now, demand withdrawal, where you demand something and then you withdraw. I want you to do it's our goalpost moving. We talked about that with the narcissist, where what they do, okay, well, tell you what, if you get all B's this semester, I'll give you $200 in the car for a month. And you're like, oh, okay. So you get all B's, and they're like, to do that, I really need to see A minuses at the very least. I mean, the reason. So that's the demand. It's a pattern of goalpost moving. The last one, please, if you're in a relationship where physical violence is how power and conflict is resolved, do not stay in it. Okay? No one deserves physical violence towards children, towards spouses, anyone. So physical violence, please, always consider that a in the relationship type of signal. Now, unresolvable disputes. Now, this can happen with family and with friends as well as significant others. The way to give it a final try is try to take turns speaking and listening. That's an invitational rhetoric that we talked about earlier this semester. It's also the phenomenological approach, where what you're doing is listening to comprehend, not listened to attack. All right, there's a difference. And you will notice this. If you're in a relationship where the person's listening to attack, you're going to have a really hard time resolving those conflicts. It can be with a sibling. If your sibling's always, every time you say something, they're just waiting to jump on you, they're not really listening. This is where you're doing that whole monologuing at each other rather than genuine dialogue. And realize that if you're going to expect it of them, you need to expect it of yourself. And so when those thoughts start creeping up in your head of, oh, as a listener, I'm just waiting to argue. I'm waiting for them to slip up and give a little power away, and I'll take that power and I'll use it against them. Don't do that. Instead, what you want to do is you want to be genuinely interested in hearing what they have to say. The approach of unconditional positive regard that we talked about with Carl Rogers earlier in the semester, where you're actually putting your judgments aside. You're just viewing them as someone you love, someone you've gotten into a relationship with. Sometimes it's a relationship you chose, such as with a significant other or a friend. Other times it's relationships that you're in. It's a family member, it's your brother, it's your mother, it's your father. But you need to try to give a genuine attempt to listen to what they are saying. And then when you're expressing yourself, make sure you're not attacking them. You give them room. Find ways to create small compromises. I can't really be around this relative, Uncle Bob for more than an hour. So instead you say, okay, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'll compromise. I'll hang out with them for 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, we can go our separate ways if you're not getting along. So you find ways, small compromises to kind of build your way there. And understand sometimes it's the healthiest thing just to go. I mean, we have an easier time ending relationships when we're talking about friends or when we're talking about relationships with significant others because they weren't in our lives before. So when they go out of our lives, we're okay with that. But when we're talking about ending relationships with a parent or with a sibling or even cousins, that can be difficult because they've been there our entire life. But you have to look at what is your healthy. I mean, if you're constantly have to give them power and they're constantly taking from you, maybe it's not the healthiest for you. Maybe it's that friend that always wants to go out drinking and you like being around them, but boy, when they're drunk, they're a jerk and they always get in fights and you just hate it. And the drinking is affecting your job and, they expect you to leave early and show up late. So it's healthiest for you to go your separate ways from that friend. So in review, what we really want to talk about today was managing power, the psychology of conflict, discrimination, because we can get discrimination in multiple forms, and it can even be within relationships that we think are strong, but we still discriminate. Mansplaining is an example. Conflict in a relationship, power and conflict endings, and unresolved conflict. So I hope you can see how all these stuff we've built up through this semester